HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Mindful Investing, Right Focus, Better Outcome, Greater Well-Being by Jonathan K. Deyoe. Foreword by Robert C. Wright. Read by Kyle Snyder. Publisher's Note. In this audio edition, you will hear references to figures present in the print and ebook formats of the book. Foreword. Almost 25 years ago, Christopher Chabris and Daniel Simons created one of psychology's most famous experiments, sometimes cheekily called gorillas in our midst. Subjects are told that they will watch a 1-minute video of 2 teams of 3 passing basketballs to one another. The subjects are instructed to count the number of passes made by the team wearing white shirts. The first time I saw the video, I correctly counted the passes, but, like roughly half of all test subjects, entirely missed the person in a gorilla suit who pranced into the experiment, stopped to beat his chest, and then sauntered off screen. I was so focused on counting passes, I missed pretty much everything else. This experiment has 2 obvious interpretations. 1, we miss a lot of what goes on around us, and 2, we have no idea that we are missing so much. We think we see ourselves and the world as they really are, but instead, we often see the world as we really are. We see what we want or expect to see and miss a lot. When I was in law school, I officiated youth basketball games to supplement my financial aid package. I had refereed a lot previously, but never so consistently and never semi-professionally. Once I'd gotten the basics down, for example, knowledge and application of the rules, authority, positioning, demeanor, etc., I was surprised at what I realized was my most consistent weakness and problem as an official. I tended to call what I expected to happen rather than what did happen. I'm sure it occurred more often than I recognized, but I recognized it far too often for comfort, even when I ultimately made the correct call. As I saw plays develop, I frequently thought I knew what was going to happen, based on lots of previous experience. For example, an awkward reach-in leads to a foul. Sometimes what I expected to happen didn't happen. Still, I whistled according to what I expected to happen far too often. I had to fight that tendency constantly. My expectations colored my judgment and even, I'm sure based on plenty of good research studies, my perception. I saw what I expected to see. In other words, I missed the gorilla. We all suffer from that tendency at least some of the time. But the implications of the invisible gorilla aren't all bad. What we look for goes a long way toward determining what we see, it's true. However, other research has shown that mindfulness increases the accuracy of our perception. This excellent book will help you with that. More importantly, this book provides helpful guidance directed at where and how we place our attention. If what we are looking for matters so much, we need to be looking for and focusing on the right things to be successful. Mindful investing will help you do exactly that, gorillas or not. I hope you will appreciate it as much as I did. Robert C. Wright, Chief Investment Officer at Madison Avenue Securities, LLC, and founder and writer of The Better Letter. Introduction. To achieve great things, 2 things are needed: a plan and not quite enough time. Leonard Bernstein. They say that ignorance is bliss. In the world of investing, however, ignorance, especially when partnered with fear, is the biggest predictor of failure. Once we conquer both ignorance and fear, financial stability and success can be ours, even bliss if we're lucky. One of the most important factors in individuals' financial success is their own behavior. Our emotions can play a huge role in our decision-making processes, and once we're mindful of this, we can make better choices. We may start out our journey merely ignorant, but all too often fear or greed takes the wheel, steering us toward financial disaster. Mindfulness is a powerful tool, helping us to pause and reflect on what's really happening. This allows us to acknowledge our feelings without necessarily acting on them, before turning back to the facts at hand. Keep emotion out of your decision-making, and stay non-reactive in the face of fear or greed. It's not easy, but it is simple. Human beings tend to make things more complicated than they need to be, particularly in the absence of information. If all you know about investing comes from the movies, you might well picture a bunch of fat cats in suits scrunching their faces at a ticker tape machine, red-faced and angry or victorious and jubilant. Either way, it looks stressful, and probably beyond the means of the average person. The good news is that's only the story the media tells us. The reality? Investing is simple. It is also boring. But that's a good thing, right? If you're like most of my clients, you're not listening to this book because you want to become a stockbroker. You're here because you want to find an easier, less stressful, and, most importantly, more successful and stable way to invest your money so that it will grow steadily and outpace your need for income into retirement and beyond. The goal of this book is to help you understand how investing works, how to make an investment plan, and how mindfulness plays into the success of that plan. Successful investing doesn't involve secrets, tips, or special expertise. It involves understanding the big picture of how the markets work, particularly understanding that in the long term, the market reliably recovers from virtually any challenge. And the key is just that, the long term. In this book, I not only explain the process of investing, but make it simple, enjoyable, and digestible. I'll do that by showing you some real-life examples of how investment tools play out. The goal is to understand what makes you happy and why a plan is important to getting there. That investing in the simplest way provides the greatest long-term outcomes. What I mean when I say simplify, simplify, simplify. Why you should start by saving consistently. How often you should be looking at your portfolio. Hint: rarely. When to listen to the media. Answer: pretty much never. The limitations of your own market knowledge. That a long-term outlook is key to your portfolio's success. How to take ownership of your story. Mindful investing is broken into two parts: why we invest and how to invest. In Part 1, we'll explore the history of investing in both its purpose and its psychology. In Part 2, we'll discuss how best to begin an investment journey, what types of investment accounts are out there, how to evaluate risk and return, and what type of returns you can expect to see in the short and long term. I'll share how I invest and how to avoid common, and some less common, pitfalls. We'll end by looking at how new investment trends play out in today's world of social media and speculation. The goal is to first understand how the market works so that you can be blissfully educated, not ignorant. As part of this education, we'll examine common fears about the market and why they're often unwarranted, as well as how to overcome them through mindfulness. Once we're aware of our emotional reactions to the market's ups and downs, we can practice noticing them as they happen and then mindfully choosing not to react. The secret to investing success is to stop predicting, start planning, and stay mindful so your investments will last your lifetime and beyond. The entire financial structure of your life should be based on how you define success for yourself, and that starts by looking at what makes you happiest in life. That is a concept we explore in Mindful Money, my first book. Mindful investing is all about the next steps. Understanding what personal success looks like for you, ignoring the media's noise, making an investment plan that aligns with your goals, and then mindfully sticking with it. That's it. The hardest part is building and maintaining your faith in the market's ability to recover. If you can do that, you can simplify the rest and reap the rewards. The first step toward planning your future is to understand the past, starting with your own history. To provide you an example, I'll start with mine. Part 1. Why we invest. Chapter 1. The Tale of the 9-Year-Old Investor. All fortune belongs to him who has a contented mind. Panchatantra. A lot of people ask how a Buddhist like me became a financial advisor. They want to know the relationship between Buddhism and finance, two areas that would appear to be diametrically opposed. And that, to me, is what's so beautiful about it. You take finance, a field many people associate with greed and desire, and you infuse it with one of the core practices in Buddhism, mindfulness. Mindfulness is the non-judgmental awareness of reality as it presents itself. When this concept is applied to investing, something powerful happens. We realize that investing is incredibly simple and not something we need to give much attention to at all. How so? 1. We first take the time to understand what it is we truly need to make us happy in this life. 2. We create a financial life plan around those happiness goals. 3. We invest according to the plan. 4. And then we can blissfully tune out all the noise as we sit back and earn what I call the happiness dividend, the joy and satisfaction from a life well lived. The best part is that the smartest investment plan is incredibly simple. And once you've made your plan, and the key here is to make that plan, you can spend as little as a couple of hours each year tending to it. In my 26 and counting years as a financial advisor, I've learned that before looking to the future and creating a financial plan, it's important to first look back and understand our own history. To do this, we'll briefly examine the history of investing in the United States and how that has shaped where we are today. Then, before diving into all the hows and whys of investing, I'll ask you to look at your own history with the practice, if any, so that you can be mindful of your biases before crafting an investment plan that works for you. I'll go first. My history. Long before I decided to pursue a master's degree in Buddhist studies, before I practiced daily meditation, before I'd ever heard the word mindfulness, I knew I wanted to be involved in finance. I bought my first stock at the age of 9. How does a 9-year-old even think to buy stocks, you might wonder? What was the driving force? Like many things, it started out of want. Growing up, I did not have, so I wanted. That's not to say my brother and I were wearing barrels and eating from tin cans, but we grew up not having all the things that the other kids at school had. Allow me to back up a little. Before I was born, my dad was an electrical engineer for Univac, manufacturers of ENIAC, the first general-purpose electronic digital computer. We're talking early vacuum tube technology, computers the size of buildings. And if my family had stayed in Silicon Valley, I'm sure we would have had a drastically different life. Maybe my dad would have raked in the money and we'd have bought fancy clothes, gone to private schools, had personal tutors, and driven cars that weren't beaters. But my parents wanted to raise their kids in a place where you could always leave your front door unlocked, where children were safe walking to school and had a yard to play in. They also wanted to be sure we learned from an early age the value of working for what we wanted. Thus, right before I came along, my parents packed up and moved to the quiet hometown safety of Rapid City, South Dakota. While writing this book, I asked my mother about the choice to move, how it affected our lives, and what she thought about my interest in money. In an email, she wrote, "From the time you were quite young, you always wanted to have the best. Remember the huge aquarium for the piranha, the top-of-the-line camera, the compound bow, etc., etc.? I'm guessing that came from watching what other kids had, but you never verbalized that to us. You grew up thinking you were poor because we were poor. I know you were told, 'We can't afford that,' often. But we also didn't discuss our personal finances with you guys a lot when you were younger, because you didn't need to know those difficulties." I want to pause here to recognize the beautiful thing my parents saw, which it took me a long time to see. That the choice to move to South Dakota was based on a core value far more important than money or social status. My parents wanted their children to grow up safe and happy. They worked their asses off to provide that without exposing us to their financial challenges. Back to my interest in finance. Like many children, I didn't realize until many years later how much my parents really sacrificed for my younger brother and me. All I heard was, "No," and "We can't afford that," when I asked for new toys or shoes or things in general. What I didn't see was how much of their time my parents sacrificed. How they rarely bought new clothes or nice items for themselves. How they drove clunky old cars and worked 2 jobs each. All so my brother and I could sign up for soccer, get swimming passes at the community pool, go skiing, and do at least some of the fun things that children want to do. Still, I wanted. The kids at school had cool shoes and nice bikes and the latest toys. My best friend had an early Apple computer. I had a Commodore VIC-20. It was hard to see that stuff those kids had and not to want some of it too. But my parents couldn't afford to buy me those things, so I had to find a way to earn enough money to buy them for myself. So I became interested in money. I didn't have any thought of taking care of my family or anything like that. My motivations were simple. I didn't have, so I wanted. Enter my introduction to investing. A Boy and His Stock. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, author of The Little Prince, famously said that a goal without a plan is just a wish. This concept is crucial to investment planning. Ideally, you determine your goal, create a plan that will meet that goal, set the plan in motion, and then let it be. Back when I was 9, my goal was to buy a bicycle. I'd heard my dad and his friends talk about the stock market and thought that would be a good way to earn some money for my bike. I started paying closer attention to what my dad was reading in Money and Kiplinger, and some days when he set the magazines aside, I'd pick them up and flip through, trying to gain insights into how I could make some cash. One day when my parents were doing some errands downtown, I slipped into a broker's office and discovered the Value Line Investment Survey. I started reading up on what to buy. With a little persuasion, I convinced my dad to help me gather my birthday, Christmas, and lawn mowing money, a grand sum of $400, and I made my first investment in a bank holding company called First Bank Systems. I'm sure you won't be shocked to hear that 9-year-old me lost most of my money on that stock. The savings and loan crisis exploded and over half my investment vanished. It was a real blow, but I was determined to get that bike. And since I was only 9, my dad ended up paying me back the $200 or so I'd lost, and I recovered pretty quickly. But that first experience with investing whet my appetite. Soon after, my dad pushed me to try again. I can't say my next investments were wildly successful either. I was a child, after all. But I really wanted money. And thus the salesman in me was born. While I was still in grade school, I started running a little sales empire, selling candy and gum to my classmates and sandwiches door to door to my neighbors. As I got a bit older, I started working with my dad on various business schemes, some more successful than others. For example, one of my dad's least successful endeavors was a button business. He bought a button-making machine, and we produced pins and ribbons that said stuff like, "First place," or "Good job," which I'd sell door to door throughout different neighborhoods. Sadly, the people of South Dakota were not ready for our product. The list of jobs continues, and my work hard for the money mentality carried me through college. Here, another pause to share a piece of my family history that shaped the type of financial planner and investor I'd eventually become. My dad taught me to invest, but my mom taught me to save. Once I started working all these little sales jobs, my mom would force me to save 50% of my income, an idea that I resented at the time, of course, but later thanked her for. Ultimately, those savings paid for my college. As a going-to-college gift, my parents split the cost of my first car with me, a $1,200 rusted-out Mazda GLC. But otherwise, I was on my own for tuition, books, and room and board. Thus, I worked full-time through college as well. A will to wealth. I went to college with a will to wealth. I wanted to be rich. But a year and a half into studying finance, I was bored. So I shifted focus and took a semester to study English literature. I read a lot of Shakespeare. But what I really fell in love with was philosophy. I set finance aside for a while and went on to complete my undergraduate degree in philosophy and religious studies. My classics professor, Marvin Shaw, saw how much I enjoyed this work and encouraged me to take my passion to grad school. I applied to the Graduate Theological Union to study as a Lutheran seminarian, but fate had other plans. First, I got a scholarship with a Lutheran seminary, but the institution ended up having to revoke the offer due to lack of funding. I asked other schools if they would support my studies. The Institute of Buddhist Studies agreed to do so if I worked in its library in return, a task I happily took on throughout my time in grad school, which ended up being shorter than I'd planned. Somewhere around the midpoint of earning that degree, my wife at the time said she wanted to go back to school too. To support her, I ended up dropping out, putting my finance hat back on, and getting a traditional job as a stockbroker at Dean Witter. But, as the saying goes, before the sun comes the rain. Or, in my case, a downpour. I started a business that imploded. I got divorced. I weighed in at 290 pounds. I couldn't get enough scotch, pizza, and ice cream. Not typically all at the same time, but I'm sure I had my moments. Bottom line, I was a mess. I had to recalibrate. A big part of why I was so unhappy during this time was that I wasn't doing what I wanted with my career. That doing what you love notion might seem like a no-brainer, but it was incredibly transformative once I realized what I wanted to do and made the switch. I had to learn a lot of hard lessons first, at 7 different Wall Street firms. But once I started my own firm, where we really focused on financial education and planning, everything shifted. I could see the ease in my clients' faces when they'd made an investment plan that would help bring them to their happiness goals. There was no longer a fight to keep up with the headlines. No more of that panicked salesman mentality. The firm was goal-oriented and planning-driven, and we succeeded because our clients succeeded. That was the real payoff. The pursuit of real happiness. This chapter in my personal history leads me to the present. It grieves me to share that around the time I started this book, my brother died suddenly. After that incredible loss, my family and I came together in a new way. We started having conversations that we'd never had before. A lot of those were around the stuff of life. What is the meaning? What is our meaning? How does money tie into all of this? My parents and I had some deep and difficult discussions. Up until then, I'd had no idea about many of the financial choices and sacrifices they had to make to provide the life they gave us. As a result, I came to a lot of humbling conclusions. What if I'd been given that bike I wanted so badly? I'd never have invested in that first stock. What if I'd been given those shoes, the toys, the car, the college tuition? I'd never have had the pleasure, so to speak, of having to work from grade school through grad school and beyond. I'd probably not have the same work ethic. I'd probably not have studied finance or Buddhism. One question that plagues me today, and which perhaps always will, is that of how much I should give my children. How much do I insist that they earn their own money? When do I say no, even if I can afford to say yes? I want my children to know what it's like to work hard for something. I want them to understand that money isn't the driving factor behind happiness. That ultimately money can be a tool to help manifest the things that help bring happiness. But most importantly, that money management, and specifically investing, can be simpler than most people think. More on that later. Business meets Buddhism. Back to that beautiful union of Buddhism and finance. As I mentioned earlier, Buddhism teaches mindfulness, here defined as a non-judgmental awareness of the present moment as experienced through our senses, thoughts, and feelings. In even simpler terms, mindfulness teaches us to be aware of what is going on in the now. When I was first pursuing my master's in Buddhist studies, I struggled with the question of how to live in the now while also planning for my financial future. What I came to realize was that having a financial plan, which inevitably includes a smart investment strategy, is what affords us the ability to just sit. How? Once you have your plan in place, you leave it be. Remember the old infomercial tagline, "Set it and forget it"? That's not unlike what I'm prescribing. Set your plan and, no matter what's going on in the storm around you, forget changing it. Stick non-reactively to your plan, and by the end of your investment journey, you will come out safe and secure on the other side. Does mindfulness actually work, though? Developing mindfulness isn't just a nice idea. This method has been growing in popularity over the last few decades, and there is plenty of science to back up its effectiveness. For example, a 2018 Harvard study found that those who practiced mindfulness experienced less stress and were able to think more clearly, which translated to better decision-making and overall happiness. In another study, Harvard researcher Sarah Lazar found that regularly practicing mindfulness meditation can change the size of key regions in the brain associated with memory, emotional regulation, perspective-taking, and self-referential processing. We can change our brains by practicing the simple art of mindfulness meditation. That's pretty amazing stuff. Mindfulness helps us to look at what is going on in our own world without being distracted by all the noise that's happening around us. As applied to our investing choices, mindfulness teaches us to stick with the plan we've set for ourselves. It allows us to pay no mind to the media, predictions of an impending recession or expansion, or the latest recommendations from so-called pundits. What I meant earlier by non-judgmental awareness is the ability to let go of certain opinions we may experience in reaction to breaking news. Take, for example, the spread of COVID-19. In March 2020, as COVID was first making its way across the land, the markets dropped and panic ensued. People saw the news and said, "Oh my God, this is terrible! It's the end of the world!" And a whole lot of them reacted by selling their stocks. Those sellers watched this event with judgment. They lost their belief in the potential for the markets to recover. And recover is exactly what the markets did. Only 3 months later, the fastest recovery in our nation's history. At the end of those 3 months, the markets were back at their previous highs, which means that those panicked sells were a terrible idea. When current events seem frightening, the most important thing we can do is to sit on our hands and wait for the scary event to pass, confident that the markets will bounce back. So far, every dip in history has been followed by a full recovery, whether we're talking about the Great Depression, the dot-com crash, the subprime mortgage crisis, or the COVID-19 downturn. Every prediction, no matter who makes it, is a judgment about potential future outcomes. As I write this in 2023, there is a lot of talk about the debt ceiling and the brinkmanship between political parties. Many pundits are predicting a recession. But even though we may agree conceptually with that thesis, or any prediction, it is impossible to make investment policy based on it for the following reasons. 1. We don't know if the thing, in this case, failure to raise or eliminate the debt ceiling, will happen. 2. We don't know when it might happen, since they can kick the can down the road in perpetuity. 3. We don't know how they will resolve the issue. 4. We don't know how long the resolution will take or last. 5. We don't know how capital markets will respond. If we don't know any of these details, how can we possibly make logical, consistently successful investment decisions in reaction to these issues? We can't. Enter mindful investing. Most of my clients practice what I call mindful investing. They make mindful choices about what a happy present and future means for them, create a financial plan around those choices, then stick mindfully and non-reactively to that plan. To use the previous example, when the market
Sample complete. Ready to continue?